Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode, 3 now of our Kubernetes Cloud Native Security Meetup. We are super excited to be here. My name is Tam Nguyen. I'm in marketing at StackRox, which is now Red Hat. I'll let my other two co-organizers introduce themselves.
Hey everyone, I'm Mike Foster, Cloud Native Advocate, also StackRox, newly at Red Hat. So thanks for joining. And last but not least.
Hello, my name is Steve Jaguar. I am also here.
Awesome. So we have a pretty cool lineup today. We're going to start off with our usual Kubernetes security update. I know Foster and Steve, you got some cool updates there. I only have a couple updates about CFPs. And then we have Michael Hausenblas with us, and he's going to be talking about supply chain security, the weakest link or links. Michael Hausenblas is the open source product advocate at AWS. And Steve, you'll be joining him on that as well. Then we have Murriel McCabe doing a cloud native security tool roundup, which is going to be really cool. So I'm really excited about that. She's a customer engineer at GCP currently. And then with every meetup, we kind of want to remind our members why we do this. So our objective is to definitely have fun and then share knowledge. So I will share a call for papers link if you are interested in speaking at future meetups. We'd love to have you on. Just submit a call for papers. And then just a reminder, we run these meetups virtually right now, the second Thursday of each month. Cool. So let's see, Steve, do you want to kind of talk about our hybrid approach once we start?
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, I can do that. We were pretty ambitious calling it a hybrid approach when we started because we assumed we'd be out of lockdown eventually. We're operating simultaneously across multiple cities, broadcasting everywhere at once, essentially. And once we are free from the shackles of COVID, we will be out there running live events in the cities, and so doing part virtual, part actual live in our what Tam has called, and we're going with it, the hybrid meetup format.
Yeah, the hybrid meetup format is actually kind of nice because it allows us to do fun things on Twitch too. So you can throw questions in the chat. We're going to ask our presenters all your questions, and obviously pick some favorites. But again, we have in the About Me section, you'll find a bunch of links down there. There's a survey. There's a couple other things if you're interested. We sent a survey and we said, hey, we're going to do a little raffle, but then we didn't collect emails as part of the survey. So we're going to change it up and take names from the chat. So you're asking a question, you're engaging. We're going to take all those names, put it in a randomizer, and hand out 2 $50 Amazon gift cards at the end of the meetup. So look forward to seeing you in there and interacting. On to you, Tam.
Definitely. And then I just want to share what our next meetup will be about. We have Jonah Jones. He's a solution architect from AWS. He's going to talk about actionable runtime security for Kubernetes. So that should be really cool. And then we also have Daniel O. He's a principal technical marketing manager at Red Hat. He's going to be talking about securing serverless functions with Quarkus Kubernetes extensions. So definitely tune in for that, second Thursday of every month. And we'll get that posted on our meetup pages as well. Cool. Awesome. Let's see. Also, a reminder to look out after all of our meetups. We definitely send out a post email with all the links that we talk about. So you guys look out for that. There will be the call for papers link as well.
Cool. On to the news update, right?
Is it worth mentioning after the meetup, we're all going to meet up, and we're going to meeting up after the meetup.
Yeah.
And a new kind of after work social platform called Toucan. So do stick with us afterwards. The link, where will the link show up?
Right here. We can put it in chat.
I'm going to put it in the chat right now to start off. But yeah, we got a little. Yeah, it's hard to copy.
Yeah, don't go there now.
And yeah, we'll just keep spamming you with it if you want to come hang out with us.
Yeah.
Good. All right. Moving on to news.
All
Tammy,
right.
take it away.
Cool. So let's see. KubeCon call for papers North America is currently open, so definitely submit for that. If you submitted for the EU KubeCon coming up, then you either got notified that your talk was accepted or it was not. So congratulations, or try out for the next round.
Yeah, I think they closed April, I believe. I think it's April 11th.
Yeah, for the North America one. And definitely we mentioned there's the rejects, that you could, the cloud native rejects, if you don't get accepted. That hasn't officially opened yet. Still waiting to see if that's happening. But if it is, that's a good substitute if you got rejected for KubeCon EU.
I wrote to them. And found out that they're not doing it until the hybrid until the one in LA. So they're not doing one for LA. EU. Yeah, they're doing it then. I asked, having been rejected.
And then if you haven't purchased your pass for KubeCon EU, there is a sponsorship deadline as well, and that is at the end of the week. So basically, check that out. We could share that in the link. That's an opportunity to get sponsored to attend KubeCon EU if you haven't had the opportunity to do that yet. So check it out.
Cool. Also, CNCF is doing a little call for mentorship. So if you have any people who are new to open source, who are in school, looking for a summer project and things like that, there are a couple opportunities that are available. I'll just post the link in the chat as well. And I believe there's a link in the About Us. So, forward along to people that you think, would get a kick out of it and like the mentorship. So that's my first one. Next one, just a general congratulations. GitHub hit its 100,000th issue last week. So it's the, I think, second largest in terms of growth next to the Little Linux project or something like that. So just congratulations to Kubernetes. And there was actually a funny issue. It was, we need to make sure that, we can have a six-digit issue open. So check that out if you get a chance. And the last sort of update I have for you is the PSP replacement is in the works, and they're starting to finalize exactly what it's going to look like. I'm going to drop the document in the chat. It is open for suggestion and comments, and the community is being very transparent about it. They're actually looking for a name too, so throw some suggestions in there. It's going to be a built-in admission controller with sort of 3 tiers of policy out the gate and 3 levels of enforcement. So you're going to have like an enforcement, an audit, and a warn, and then you can kind of enforce, audit, or warn based off of a kind of default open, very restricted, or sort of a medium tier of restriction on your pods. So I think it's going to be a better replacement of PSP. You're going to be able to probably come in with sort of a warn complete open as a default. So, it's going to warn you if you have root, but it's not going to shut down any workloads by default. I think it's a good sort of middle ground that I think a lot of the community agrees with. So check that out. And I believe the next release will be upcoming in the next month, but don't take my word for that. On to you, Steve.
All right, thanks. Yeah, just one thing for me. That is, since we last did a meetup, the latest Tech Radar came out, which I have been a fan of. It's regarding secrets management. I think it came out at the end of February. And if you don't know the Tech Radar, it's pretty easy. You just go to radar.cncf.io and you can see the latest one. Plus, you can see all the previous ones that have happened. They come out-ish monthly, sort of, since I think it was June. Maybe a couple months. Quarterly. There you go. That's probably better. They did continuous delivery, database storage, and observability. I've always been kind of hoping they would do security tooling more specifically, but a lot of those do relate to security anyway. But get involved with that because they do ask for feedback from the world and community as to what areas they should do next. So it's always interesting because although you can see the different phases of adoption, trial, and assessment, it doesn't tell you the direction things are going, whether they're going towards or away from adoption, but it is always fascinating to see the different tools that are in there, and sometimes there's a few surprises. So go check that out.
Yeah, I'm going to throw that last link in the chat as well. It's on the CNCF website.
Perfect.
That is all the updates that we have for you. If we missed something, throw it in the chat. Let us know what we missed. I know there's always so many announcements going on all the time. So I look forward to seeing you there. Tim and I are going to leave you, Steve. So don't miss us too much. See you in a bit.
You're going to send Michael, and I hope. Michael Hausenblas, somehow get in here. There we go. Hey, Michael, hey. There he is.
Doing, man? Long time no see.
Yeah, you've been sitting in the green room. Or you actually are in a sort of green flaming room. That works.
Yeah, that's true.
Very good. All right. For those of you who, I don't know, live somehow in the dark or in your basement or whatever, and you don't know who Michael is the AWS developer advocate, co-author with Liz Rice of the Kubernetes security book, and is at a lot of events talking about a lot of things in the CNCF ecosystem space and AWS. So Michael, thank you for being on only episode 3 of this meetup. That's awesome.
Thank you so much for having me, Steve.
Yeah, no worries. You have volunteered to be our victim special guest to talk about supply chain. That was a pretty big and somewhat vague subject you offered us. Tam did a good job of suggesting the weakest link. I don't know why she said that as a title, to set you up. So for people who are listening and are thinking, well, what part of supply chain? I'm going to try and throw some context at it, because when we talk about everything's a supply chain, right? We know that everything in the world is a part of some form of supply chain. But when we're talking about our ecosystem, I see 2 versions of it. I think people think about vetting third-party artifacts that are entering into my software supply chain. And there are ways of scanning or signing or vetting all of those. But then there's the internal supply chain itself. So once everything's inside there, have we turned security off now, and are things just flowing through unvetted, and just is there an assumed trust? So those are the 2 I'm thinking of. Is there anything else that I might be missing?
I think you mentioned the main points there. Let me try to do an analogy. I have my prop here. I went to the kitchen. Oh, you don't really see that well, but that is an egg carton, right? Eggs. And it has various things on it, right? And if you think about it, we put a lot of trust into these things, right? It says, free range, and each egg has actually a code on it, right? So I can theoretically go to a certain farmer, knock on the door, and say, like, hey, I'd like to see that chicken or whatever, right? So theoretically, food, right, is already in a place that should give us the opportunity to really trace back where exactly something came from, because I don't want to eat certain kind of food, or I'm allergic to it, or whatever. So it turns out, I would say that we are in software, cloud native land, probably roughly where we are with food, right? Because at the end of the day, like, who of us really goes to the farmer, knocks on the door, and says, like, I want to see that chicken, I want to see that, pig or whatever. We put an awful lot of trust in the whole system, right? It says, the eggs are somehow packaged and so on under the supervision of this and this board and whatnot. Like, have you ever talked to them? Have you ever checked? Like, do you actually know anyone there? Like, a lot of trust. Like, we trust in the system, and this can go absolutely horribly wrong. I brought you 2 examples here. One of them might very well be known. I don't know if I put it here on that chat, if we can amplify that to the people on the call in the meetup. The one example, a gentleman here by the name of Alex Person, who says he hacked into multiple companies, essentially by exploiting a feature of the Python package index, name squatting, to essentially poison the supply chain. And the solar winds hack is probably an even more prominent example. And again, I'm not focusing on like how exactly the whole thing worked, right? Like, be it a password or something leaked or whatever, who cares? At the end of the day, the fact is we are relatively naive or relatively maybe we are aware, but not really we don't really invest a lot into securing the supply chain, making sure that all our tooling, the artifacts, etc., we can actually prove where they come from, and end to end from where it's produced to where it's running in a certain container orchestrator. And that is something that worries me. And my goal here is really to raise awareness, what we can do about it, and to see what people out there think about it and what they do. Maybe I'm in a bubble and talking to the wrong people. I get the impression it's not yet where it's supposed to be. And we can do better than food, I think. We have all the digital, tools in our hands, so we should be able to do it.
Yeah, we should. Well, we should be able to. It's funny you say we should be able to. So last time, well, I don't think it's last time we spoke, but when we spoke earlier, you had done a study, and you were a bit surprised about the reaction to, or the lack of reaction to supply chain security.
Yeah, I shared here, and maybe if I could quickly share my screen for this one.
Can we do that? Let me see.
If I say share here,
if you do that,
my screen?
Yeah, it's there.
Right. So this is the second installment of the container security survey, and you can see here, right, that red thing, that -11. It might be, the data compared to last year might not be, entirely comparable or whatever, but it clearly has not, as all the other categories, increased, right? That's at least clear. And I would really like to know why, right? Like all the other things, some of them, like, image signing, which can be considered part of the supply chain, scanning or whatever, they increased a little bit, right? But supply chain dramatically decreased. And I would really like to understand why, right? That's really, at the end of the day, what I'm worried about and what I would like to bring to the table and discuss.
Well, I've got a few questions, but let's throw one at you from the crowd, and hope they don't mind me putting it on the screen. Well, let's just do that. From Pillars of Soul, nice handle.
Yeah.
What trends do you see increased focus on supply chain attacks by malicious actors will drive in the near future? So, more data custodians, more in-house developed tools. What do you think the reaction to these supply chain attacks will be? Essentially, it sounds like.
Right. So 2 parts to that, and obviously, the last thing I want to do is give potential hints here or tips how to do that. But I think what we've already seen is that at least these stories, as the 2 examples that I shared here, are being talked about, being written about. It is a topic, right? Like we have heard and seen many other things, like a virus or Trojan horse or whatnot. That's kind of like super common. Everyone knows what it is. And in the context of this shift left, like putting more and more responsibility onto developers because of cloud native, because the infrastructure slowly disappears, so the responsibility shifts to the left, to the developer. It is important, right? It is important that you're aware. If you're not aware of something, then how can you even be in a position to fight it, right? So that's a positive development, right? It's been talked about. People slowly get a handle on it. What I think the challenge here, really, the main challenge is that it is a bit scary. It is like there are so many moving parts, and we, as a human species, we have this reaction. Like if it's overwhelming, we very often say like, oh, well, let's do nothing at all, right? Rather than it's because it's so big, it's so scary. Maybe better we don't do anything at all. And that's maybe the wrong attitude. Maybe small steps, simple things, and I have a few suggestions here where you can start, are already enough, are already in the steps in the right direction, right? No one expects that you do everything from day one. But in the same way that you're doing baby steps with in other areas like observability, etc., you can do baby steps here. And let's focus on these baby steps. Maybe that's the next step beyond pure awareness, being aware of what is going on.
I think that's probably you've led right to what's going to be the next question now. And what is if you've got nothing in place? There's probably two versions of this. What is my first baby step? And then if I'm a small organization, and what if I'm a massive enterprise and I'm kind of freaking out a little bit because of the SolarWinds example, for where that supply chain, I can be actually perceived as the weak link in the chain of a downstream supply chain. So what can I do easily now, and what should I be working towards, I suppose, is the question.
Right. And again, just to come back to the original, like why I was super happy when we added the weakest link, because the weakest link obviously are humans, right? Like we trust, like we are the ones who type in pip install or curl or wget and then pipe it into bash, like YOLO, right? Let's just do it. Docker pull, or kubectl run. All of those things are at the end of the day executed by humans. That's why, and because it's a supply chain, obviously the weakest link in that chain being us humans. But the more we can automate, the more essentially the more tooling we can in all of our daily lives can employ to do things automatically without us really, it might need some configuration, but we don't really notice it. Right? As a developer, you code, you push, you part of your local CI or whatever pipeline, it's already there. It's part of that. Of course, someone needs to pick the right tool. There are plenty, you folks provide things. There are many cloud providers do many options there. Someone likely in the platform team, security with security background will decide what kind of risk to take or what kind of effort to put in. But once it's configured, it just should be part of your CI and CD pipeline. And for example, in the context of developers, two examples of tooling for the very basic of what you can do are these two things, Sift and Cyclone DX, which essentially really only give you a BOM, right? A bill of material, right? If you don't know what's there, like how can you even go like, do I trust this or that? First, you need to take stock, right? You need to know what is there. And again, these are just two examples. There are many more, obviously, but things like that, if you integrate that in your local development environment, IDE, in your VI, in whatever you're using, and in your local or your entire CI, where it's just part of your overall day-to-day task, where you're not explicitly thinking about it, you just create the BOM as a side effect of your daily work in checking in or pushing to a registry or whatever. And that's the kind of like the baby step that I mean. Once you have that, then you can build on top of that, right? You can go further and say like, all right, maybe the next step, right? Looking at low-hanging fruits, or put the other way around, where can I, with the least effort, have the most impact, right? And that is in terms of runtime. If I can enforce policies saying like, for example, in this Kubernetes cluster, I will only allow people to run images from this allow listed registry, right? Again, this is automatically enforced. It will, if you're trying, no matter if you're doing a kubectl apply or via some GitOps tooling, the feedback channel might be different, but you will immediately be warned off saying like, you're not going to deploy that, right? This is against our policy. this is a very low-hanging fruit, right? There's not much to do there, right? There are many options. There's Open Gatekeeper there. There is Kubernel. We can use OSO library. There are many options to just do that kind of like policy enforcement for very, like, it's not even fine-grained, but it's just a very blunt policy to say we only allow images from this, allow listed registry, right? And these are examples of baby steps that I would say they have really the most impact and have the least disruption or the least additional work on we're all already very busy, right? And if the more we get on our table, the less willing we are, I guess, to go that extra mile if we don't see the immediate benefit out of it, right?
That sounds good. So that's when we're generating the bill of materials. That almost is applying to when I talked about the two versions of supply chain, ensuring that you know what it is you're working with. That almost be basic awareness. That's even before, say, running vulnerability scans on the bill of materials, just to see if you have anything like that. Just knowing that's the list is pretty good.
Exactly.
Yeah. And then the next phase, if I leave vulnerabilities out of it and we start talking about, because there's a few questions in the chat that are roughly related. And one of them was to do with, can we use you knew blockchain was going to come up. I thought that's probably not going to be a surprise. That had to happen. And then there was a mention of SigStore,
yes,
which was a recent announcement. So are those more advanced plays on this?
Yes, I was literally about to share these two additional examples, the one CNCF in total and the other one SigStore, which was very recently announced, I believe, a collaboration of Red Hat and Google Cloud. And again, these are in general open source. There, I'm sure, also commercial closed source offerings there, but very often you find that as open source. Two examples that you really want to take a closer look at that, right? You, no matter in which direction you lean, I didn't have a chance yet to look deep into SigStore. It seems to have quite some overlap with the work in Notary version 2, the ongoing work there. And in Toto or Grapheus is another example. I'm not that sure how active it still is, but there are a few of these projects out there that, compared to the things that we discussed before in terms of the bill of material and enforcing policies at admission or whatever, might be considered a little bit more advanced and a little bit more effort. But I would view them as, once you have done all these baby steps, once you have the bill of material, once you're doing table stakes, right? Container image scanning is table stakes, right? This is not even a question anymore. It's like, why would you not do it, right? It's then just a question: are you only doing operating system level? Are you doing also application specific things, etc.? But static container image scanning is clearly, and the data shows it, widely adopted and table stakes, not something you're a huge differentiator. But runtime scanning, right? Once you have all these things in place, I think then you are ready for something like InTotal or other comparable projects that take really more like end-to-end point of view, that track metadata, that allow you to query along the entire supply chain. So maybe that's the right way to go about it, rather than the other way around. Like, obviously you can, right? You can start top down with the big guns, but you might run into more issues in the sense of that the immediate feedback and the immediate benefit that you will see might not be as big as compared to the other way around, where you have an immediate benefit, you see an immediate benefit, and you can layer and add more as you go along, and as you're more comfortable with the tools or methods you have already in use.
There was a project that was introduced at one of the recent OpenShift Commons by John Willis. I think it was called Recore, and it looked Grafeus based, but for the blockchain enthusiasts out there, it mentioned Merkle tree. It was doing all the right trendy things. Have you seen that? Like, is it on your radar?
I thought it was part of, wasn't that under the SIG store?
Is that SIG store? See, I haven't looked at the SIG store much either.
Let me double check, but you're talking about, oh, sorry, no, I'm mixing up you. Yeah, it was renamed. So I have it still under, so if you look at this one here, right? When I originally bookmarked it, I still had it bookmarked under Project Recore/Recore, and now they have apparently moved the GitHub organization to SIG store. So it is now, that's what you mean, right? That's Recore.
That is what I mean.
Right. So it's apparently part of that initiative. Maybe it came from somewhere else, I don't know, but it is perfectly, proper part of that SIG store initiative. Yes.
Awesome. Well, that is the answer then. Wow. See, you blink and somebody renames something. That's no good.
Yeah, I think that's like the biggest part of our jobs is to keep track of all these different moving parts and remember where it came from and where it's going and what the current status is, right?
Yeah, no doubt. And particularly when you're about to interview somebody about supply chain, you should really have read the news that day. So how do those how do the projects like InToto and, well, let's include SIG store, et cetera, but those where there's a little bit more complexity, having looked at let's just say if you go to InToto and you look at the demo page for it, it's got a pretty straightforward, without having to go through it yourself. If you just read it, you get how it works, you get what it does. But it sounds to me like you need almost 100% buy-in at all touch points to make it really work at scale, which then makes me think this could be why we don't have these sorts of things executing at scale.
100%. That's why. So my recommendation to these baby steps is not just a theoretical one. This is really coming based out of the conversations I'm having with customers, users in the last couple of years, where whenever this kind of approach was taken, right, implementing smaller bits where you have an immediate, admission control. Okay, we've clearly seen before, after, makes sense, works, fine. Let's move on to the next. That these kind of approaches, bottom-up approaches, have overall longer term much more success or higher success rate, much more overall the team morale and everything is better than if you have this, okay, let's do it, big buy-in from top down and everyone go. It's just too much, right? And I'm not saying that it's impossible. There might be organizations that are capable of pulling it off, but in most of the cases, it's much more. It's much better to bottom up, to go bottom up.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Well, I think the reason I was thinking that was perhaps, and I don't mean to discredit this. I mean this like in a complicated way. When CrowdStrike released their article, which detailed a lot about how the SolarWinds attack played out, there was a moment where malware, in a way, infiltrated the build process itself. So you would have actually required something like this deployed at scale to have mitigated at that point. When, right. And it's too easy to say, aha, you should have used InToto. Like, of course, there was already malware in at that point. So there might have been something earlier they could have done.
Yeah, so the two interesting things are, on the one hand, that, rather than, I don't know, in the good old days, I still managed to transmit and spread viruses via a floppy disk. In case you don't know what a floppy disk is, look at this symbol up there that looks like that's the floppy disk. So, that was one way to transmit things, right? Also bad things. Here, the actual way of transmitting this malware was the supply chain itself, right? You would, by downloading that, like the attacker, once however they gained access to it, that's a separate thing, but that's the responsibility of the people, creating these artifacts or these tools. But at some point in time, they managed to inject that there, and then they would essentially just lean back and wait until you would come along and pull that, right? And that's where this is part of your responsibility. It's again this, sure, you can go, wget or curl and bash and YOLO, right? Or kubectl or Docker run. But maybe you should only be doing that in a very isolated environment where you're in VM and you nuke that if you don't like, right? It's as with everything else, we have that in all our corporate trainings, like don't click on links, don't open or attachments, etc., etc. This is a matter of awareness, a matter of training, and this kind of like awareness and training overlaid and combined with the tooling where we can automate, where we can actually prove things like, we didn't really go into great detail, but image signing, for example, we can actually prove, yes, this is actually from this person, from this organization. This combination hopefully will help making that weakest link a little bit stronger. That's my hope.
All right, awesome. I think that's a great moment to end our discussion about supply chain. Michael, thank you very much. It's been awesome. We've heard about best practices. We've got some tools in the chat that we can get started with. We've got some hints of where we can get more advanced if we need. And there was one more question that came in from the crowd, somebody being a bit cheeky, asking for what can we expect from your next book with Andy Martin, Hacking Kubernetes? Any teasers?
The short answer is obviously you got to buy it, right? No. The thing is, what we try to do there is really this kind of red team, blue team thing, right? So we would start off per topic with the defaults. Here are the Kubernetes defaults. How can you attack them? And then how can you defend against them? What if you're defending against that? Is there another step, another layer back and forth? So that's the kind of, and the first 3 chapters are up there. They just give you a little taste, but that's the basic idea of that book. It's somewhere in between this pure cookbook, where it's just one recipe after the other, and this more structured, you learn about how these things work. We essentially assume already Kubernetes, more or less, right, down to the API server, etc. And you're kind of familiar with the security bits as well, right? Not everything, but we're not teaching you from scratch what Kubernetes security is about, what PSPs are about, etc., etc. But actually, what are the defaults? How can they be exploited, and how can you defend against that? That's the basic plot of the basic idea.
Okay, awesome, exciting. Is that coming out? Did I hear November?
Hopefully. If any of that keep writing, then yes.
2021.
Fingers
right?
crossed. Fingers crossed. Yes.
All right. Amazing. All right. Thanks, Michael. That is awesome.
Thanks, Michael.
You may go. I have to figure out how to make that happen and bring in we need to bring in Michael first and Murriel. And then hello, welcome our next guest. You're going to be doing our Cloud Native Security Tool Roundup. I am a tool geek, so I'm super excited about that. And I'm going to get out of here and let you kick off.
All right, sounds great. Well, thank you. It's great to be on here with Steve, Michael, and Tam. So thank you. That was a super awesome convo, and also looking forward to that next book coming up. So let me see if my screen, we are online. Perfect. I see it coming up. So I will say, again, maybe I'll start over with my intro. I'm Murriel. I'm a customer engineer with Google Cloud. As always, opinions are mine here, and any omissions are not intentional. This is just kind of a non-comprehensive roundup. I'd love to get some of your feedback as well, Steve, being a tool geek. And also maybe not bleeding edge, somewhat biased to coverage of open source. As you know, it's a rapidly changing landscape, but going back to this whole idea about baby steps, this is definitely kind of geared towards that beginning of the security journey, just looking at some of the different tools and topics out there. I'd love to hear about some of your own experiences and thoughts with these different tools. And just because I wanted today to be a little bit exciting, I'm going to attempt to do a few live demos as well. So let's get going. So looking at just cloud native and cloud native security tools, let me pop back over here. So what even is this, and what categories do we have as far as tooling goes? As you know, this is comprehensive, and there are things that overlap in all of these spaces. I'll kind of look everywhere from your SaaS full platform tools all the way up through your infrastructure frameworks, Kubernetes, Git tools. Yes, Kubernetes is on there 2 or 3 times. And even going down the layer into your network security, there are various different subcategories that we can dial into. So like I mentioned, this is just going to be kind of a roundup of some different tools, many of which have been around for a while. And I think going back to starting at the beginning of the journey with this idea of what our original models might have looked like as far as these layers, right? The security layers of the onion, looking at defense in depth and so on. And if we're looking at just some of the old models that were maybe IT-centric or consolidated and monolithic, looking at expanding out in this very linear way from your data all the way up through your application, all the way up through, yes, the human layer, which is sort of this big layer that overlays on the top of that. Just kind of going back to the previous conversation about one of the big weak links and one of the main areas where we can introduce, and you can't quite automate or account for all of the human errors that get introduced into the system. So let me kind of continue on from here, where this is from the CNCF Cloud Security White Paper. We're looking at now these cloud layers, where if we drew arrows on top of this, as you know, it's not going to be the same directional thing. It's more of a loop where the arrows kind of interchange back and forth between, you're now split out different types of services and compute all the way up through this life cycle where you've got hooks into each and every part of the process and rapid iterations around that. So now we're just looking at being able to build our security layers around this continuous feedback method where everything is sort of interchanged, modular, interconnected between the layers of control as well, between your service providers and yourself and these distributed teams. It's more of this distributed model, right, with a shared responsibility. So if we continue on from here, now to take more of this academic look back at the essential characteristics of cloud computing, which goes back to that previous note about how the different layers interchange, is, according to NIST, on-demand, self-service, broad network, where now that network layer isn't as controllable as it might have been prior for these more consolidated configurations. Resource pooling, elasticity, and measurement. So I'll kind of step through this. So one of the places that I kind of love to start out with for conversations about like the cloud is looking at the Cloud Native Computing Foundation interactive landscape. So this alone is just what we have as far as everything that falls into the security and compliance world. And it's, a mix of everything from your commercial tools through your open source tools, through this sort of commercial open source where you might have tiered models of free plus premium, along with a lot of open source projects that have been released by some of these different organizations. I kind of take a quick look on GitHub, and as far as the top rated projects go, and as of this past week, Claire had the most stars at about 7,500, followed by Cert Manager at 6,886, and then Trivia at just around 6,000 as well. So I'll kind of continue on. I'm going to dial into a few of these specific tools as I go. But I did want to pop this up. If you all are familiar with the Awesome Lists project, there are quite a few of these awesome lists, which are sort of roundups of security tools, cloud native security tools, along with a lot of other really great info. As with any of these lists go, and with the landscape that kind of keeps changing, it's sort of a really quick path to deprecation and replacement for some of them. So part of going through those lists is that journey of kind of checking on the different projects and repos, seeing when that last updated date was, figuring out what hasn't been touched in maybe a couple of years or has been replaced or integrated into or acquired or sent over to a different organization. But if you have other lists that you like to refer to or use, then totally please throw them into the chat as well. So I wanted to go into a few of the, from that list of the CNCF security projects, looking at some of the graduated/incubating projects. So far out of these, the top 2 graduated projects are Open Policy Agent, which I'll dial into a little bit more. And then these 2 I'll kind of conjoin together, the Update Framework and Notary, which kind of go hand in hand. Notary is basically an implementation of TUF. The Update Framework built in Go, and it's this project that allows you to be able to have trust over arbitrary collections of data. And it's basically this framework for being able to update systems, use case like container distribution. And when we're going back to this whole conversation about supply chain, how do you verify and trust that you're getting what you expect to be getting? There's another implementation, and I don't recall the name offhand, but that is basically related to cars, where that's another place where security and updates become critically important because it translates into this idea of physical space now. If you're doing an over-the-air update to a vehicle and are relying on this vehicle to safely transport you from one way to another, this idea of trusting an update becomes critically more important. And then another incubating project, as I mentioned, Falco, which is cloud native runtime security. So let's go into OPA a little bit, because this kind of came up in the last conversation as well, about being able to now control and not only just be able to set policies around what you can and can't do with your applications and with your environments, but also it's now taking that and being able to decouple that from the actual code itself, and also be able to manage your policy as code. Because that way, you can have this version controlled, you can have a source of truth for that, and you know what at any point in time, what you want your system to be doing. And as this policy engine, there is this flexibility of being able to say, we can plug this in where we want it to be along the chain. It's built in this language, Rego, its own, and previously was sort of implemented through this sidecar method. But one of the common implementations of this is using the gatekeeper admission controller. And as a note here, there is a playground on the openpolicyagent.org site that actually lets you pull in these different samples of your policies to see how the file should be structured and how to be able to create the types of policies that you need with samples. So I will actually pull in here. I will not run this live time, but I do have an example policy here. This one is maybe a sample for being able to control your user access. And then going back to that same conversation earlier about image safety and being able to define, your trusted sources for your image, this is a sample of what that Rego might look like for being able to allow or deny pulling images from a certain registry. And so part of just the benefit of being able to have this sort of general purpose engine, right, is how you consume it is up to you, right? Integrating it into your custom tooling to be able to get started. There is, this can be run interactively. So you just run that command line utility OPA eval or OPA run to be able to sort of interactively test out and run your policies in a sandbox, and then also available as a Go library. And now to kind of continue on as far as our incubating projects, as far as the incubating projects in CNCF. A couple of those were mentioned here too, like the in toto cert manager for being able to manage TLS certificates. And these are all still in this like incubating state, waiting to be able to graduate and make it out into the world as the fully fledged CNCF projects. Now everybody's favorite topic, policy and compliance. And so wanted to talk a little bit about just some of these different security baselines and frameworks. They're sort of a choose your own adventure depending on what types of policies and what types of standards the internal security team has decided to go through. I was actually part of a DevOps book club at work, and we started at ground zero with the Phoenix project again. And if any of you that remember John, the CISO from there that walked around with his binder full of the rules and regulations for compliance and each of the standards about, patching and down to the level of detail. Well, a lot of these baselines and frameworks kind of echo that same idea. So a lot of these different providers and tools may build in these benchmarks as a frame of reference to be able to define just some policies and enforcement around. I wanted to talk through a few of the common ones just from a very high level. So we have the STIG guidelines, security technical implementation guides, of which there are over 400. I think there are some for like your BlackBerry Enterprise server all the way down through Kubernetes. And these are maintained by the US Defense Information Systems Agency. There are also a set of benchmarks from the Center for Internet Security. And then we have MITRE, which you all may know as kind of the maintainer of the CVE system, which is pretty much like the standard for being able to list the common vulnerabilities and exposures. But MITRE is a nonprofit, which has been around since like the 1950s, manages and works a lot with these federally funded agencies to be able to maintain. And now I'm going to talk about the attack framework as well a little bit more. And then there is the Cloud Security Alliance as well with the Cloud Controls Matrix. And then the last two open projects that I'm going to mention are OpenSCAP, SCAP is the Security Content Automation Protocol, which is a US standard. But OpenSCAP itself is this collection of these different open source tools for being able to implement and enforce those standards as well. And then we have OpenVAS as well, the Open Vulnerability Assessment Scanner, which is an open source project that ended up as a fork where, back in time there was Nessus, and when that kind of changed its open source model, we had various forks that came out of that, and the winner out of that ended up being this OpenVAS project. So looking at the MITRE attack framework that we have here, it's adversarial tactics, techniques, and common knowledge. But basically just this framework and sort of this knowledge base collected from, out in the world of these different areas of compromise against systems. And so it's actually a really good and interesting framework for being able to respond to threats by really understanding what the threats are. And so each of these, you can see all of the little numbers, there are quite a few here in these different categories. But if you dial into any one of those, then you've got some of this guidance for being able to see, well, what are some of the different, specific threats that that fall under, for example, domain policy modification or so on. And just another note, let's see, actually, I'm moving on to Cloud Security Alliance. So these are the different categories from the Cloud Security Alliance, which is this framework specifically for cloud computing. And it also has this idea of these different control objectives in different domains. Some of you may be familiar with the K8s questionnaire, which is this method for being able to sort of assess service providers off of these very specific areas of compliance. And then along with that is this whole STAR registry for being able to kind of create the certification for cloud providers and their security controls. I won't go too much in depth, just sort of calling out as far as the security tools and the different cloud providers. Each has, a pretty, these are just kind of from a high level, some of like the aggregators, like the Security Command Center, AWS Security Hub, and Azure Security Center. But along with each of these, every provider is going to have its own sort of first-party set of tools that handle everything from like your secrets management all the way up through network security, user security, and so on, key management, etc. All right, so let's talk about some Kubernetes tools. And I'd love to download as well with Michael and all of the team after this offline about just, thoughts and from all the rest of you too, thoughts about each of these tools. So I'm going to look at a few of these specifically, like Cubebench and KubeHunter, which are both sort of maintained by Aqua. There's the SIS Kubernetes benchmark verification. So looking at things from more of the defensive side of things of what is our current configuration and posture look like? How do we stack up against the benchmarks? And then KubeHunter, which is more of the offensive, maybe red team side of things, of being able to go through and do penetration testing. Of course, only against, clusters that you own and manage and are authorized to be able to test against. And then there are a few other tools here like KubeAudit. And I didn't mention to Tam that I was going to do a little bit on KubeLinter as well, because I figured while we're here, I might as well check that out. So let's go live. So if we're going to start here with Cubebench, there's the repo on GitHub where you just basically pull down, and there are a few different methods of being able to run this. But what I've done is I've just deployed this directly into my cluster. I've got a test cluster running right now that is just running kind of a standard guestbook application. And so here is the part that is exciting is, does my demo work? So I've got a few notes here. If you know of the guestbook application, it's just kind of a very basic HP app that has Redis running. And I don't know if I can share that right now, but basically you just kind of do postings and it shows up on this guestbook. So I've already actually applied and added this in. So if you see here, I ran the Cubebench job, so it kicks off as a job. And then now if we go in and run this, you can see here in the log output that we've actually got all of, and this is like a very manual way of running it, like, in your systems or maybe in your test frameworks, you'd have this run in sort of an automated sense if you wanted to scale. But you could just see here in this example where we're going through and seeing how basically this cluster stacks up against all of these different benchmarks. And you can see there are some warnings, info pass, and then here are some fails that we're going to need to remediate. And it goes down into all of the details and summary and so on. So that was kind of a very quick demo of the Cubebench. And let's look at now KubeHunter. So KubeHunter, I've actually already installed because, like YOLO, we pip installed that and it's now up and running. You can also install this in a few different ways. Here, as I've mentioned, you can install this locally. You can also deploy this into a container. But in addition, this can be deployed directly as a pod within your cluster to see and assess what could happen if one of the pods within your cluster gets compromised. So I'm going to go ahead and run this in this sort of interactive mode. And I have this is my endpoint for the test cluster. And And we did not come up. There we go. Maybe some like copy pasted happened. So as you can see now, it's just going through and being able to do a scan. I guess maybe you can kind of consider this similar to like a cloud native microservice Kubernetes version of Nmap, where we go through, do a scan, and be able to detect things like your different vulnerabilities, services, and so on, and it outputs here as this report. So now onto Kubelinter, there are a few ways of being able to set this up. You can install this using Go. I just did a brew install to set this up, and I already have a kubelint, sort of text YAML file here. And to be able to run this linter, we're just going to do the kubelint.yaml, and now you can see that all of these different notifications here are about what you got to go fix in that YAML. And so, just looking at these different layers and the different steps that happen during the security journey, this is of course just sort of this very manual one-off way of being able to run things, but as an org or a company progresses and so on, like a lot of these tools, which are these sort of manual tools, would then just be integrated as part of the pipeline or as part of the process. So before things go out into deploy, like before things get deployed, do we have a set of these just standard tests that are run? And it kind of goes into this sort of like buy versus build conversation too, where a lot of this tooling is out there to be able to set up and integrate into what you have, but then also there are service providers out there that kind of build and pull all of this stuff together, so that there's sort of this like unified platform or managed platform for being able to do this. All right, cool. So live demo success. Next part is there are a few more pieces looking at auditing. So this is also not a super comprehensive list, but these are the various tools where kind of going back to that same conversation about being able to understand how to secure your environment. Part of that is knowing what you actually have, especially when you may have, different teams, setting up things in different ways. To be able to get this full picture of actually what's where is useful, so you don't have that one system that's the vulnerable system as the entry point to be able to exploit or access everything else, right? So here are a few different tools. It's largely a mix, as I was looking between some that are based on Python, a couple on Node, I believe Aqua was, but don't quote me on that. So I'll actually look at Scout Suite briefly. Forseti is one that, so these are kind of a mix of things that are focused at all cloud providers, and then some that are maybe AWS specific like Duo Labs, or Forseti, which is more of a GCP specific tool for being able to sort of persistently run and secure your environment. And you can see there's kind of a list here of just some different tooling that's out there for being able to audit and get a picture of what you've got running on your system. So Scout Suite. Now let's see if we can get this one running as well. So this also is just, the GitHub repo is available for Scout Suite. If you pull that down, then you can see you've got your various tools here. So I've got all of the requirements installed already, and I'm just going to run this as a one-time thing. You basically have the option for being able to specify which environment, and there are the options for being able to do the authentication and so on. So you can scan Amazon, Azure, and GCP as well. So I'm going to run on this test project that I've got set up. as you can see now, it's, and this can of course be run with something that has maybe just read-only access. There are a few different modes for being able to run this, but at the end of it, what is actually going to happen, and I have a sample of this file just to, eliminate live demo issues, but there we go. All right, so this is what your final report might look like. It just generates this local HTML file. As a note, this is released by NCC Group, which has released a suite of other tools as well. The previous iteration, I think, was called Scout 2, and there were maybe a few other tools now that have been kind of rolled up here. But there are also just a variety of other open source projects that they have for being able to do security auditing, scanning, and so on. And see here, you can see it's sort of Scout Suite allows you to be able to drill in and see, flags for different places that have been audited and checked, and what even here what the compliance would look like. Okay, so let me go back to my deck. And at this point, you can see it's still kind of running and doing its thing. This is a fairly simple environment with just a few resources. You kind of set it to run and go grab a cup of coffee, or have this scheduled so that pop out a report that you can read once it's done. All right, so just a few other things. Another place that I wanted to talk about is secret management, because this is something that I think is just a very interesting problem overall. Looking at how to be able to manage secrets, but not just managing the secrets themselves, but managing particularly secrets that both runtime secrets and also secrets in this whole idea of supply chain secrets as well. So, each of the cloud providers has sort of their own secret manager. Their Vault is, this is a very, non-comprehensive list. Vault, of course, is kind of the big player in the open source world. There's CyberArk, and then also a ton of different tools for being able to look at Git secrets specifically. So GitHub Secrets is more of just within GitHub itself. You have this ability now to be able to manage secrets, but then there are also a lot of these tools that allow for scanning. And now I feel like more and more the providers are being able to integrate this idea of secret detection, so that like within GitLab or GitHub, you kind of get a flag of, do you really want to have your, access keys to your bucket there in the code? Because Git history is really painful to rewrite. So there are a lot of ways of being able to sort of capture and detect before secrets actually make it into your repositories. But then I guess the overall idea too is just looking as this whole conversation kind of continues about, one, just how do we deliver and manage secrets? How do you sort of like bootstrap and start with the initial level of trust to be able to authenticate into your secrets management systems? And then also when you're now looking at runtime and looking at sort of the threat model across your pipelines, where at some point access has to be granted and the secret is going to be exposed or accessible. And so defining where those links are through the chain and how to be able to manage this through your secret solution becomes a problem that I think a lot of organizations are really trying to solve. And then I'll kind of end it here with just different SIM tools to kind of bring it back to now this whole conversation of, we've looked at auditing and testing, policy and so on, but now looking at just SIM tools where it's like, how do we get visibility from a top level, and also outside of just being able to see things from a top level and get the dashboards. How do you get intelligence and sort of build a profile of the security of your environment and dial into specific logs? How do you do incident management? Can you get alerts when something has happened? And so there are a list of a few different tools, including the very currently beleaguered SolarWinds, and a lot of just these different other areas. Elastic has Elastic Security now, and I'd be really interested in hearing opinions about that, because Elk has been kind of in this space where it's not really a SIM, but you got a lot of logging going in there, and it's been sort of purposed in between, being a full-fledged SIM and being able to be kind of the point where your logs and operations are available. But yeah, overall, we're collecting data, setting policies, analyzing data, and sending notifications as part of this. And then the last bit, which I haven't really added too many details into, is there are also a set of just offensive tools for being able to do sort of this testing and like everything from enumeration to penetration testing, chaos testing, and there are also these different honeypots as well, some of which are mentioned on those awesome lists of just being able to see, if you have a framework for what an insecure environment might look like WebGoat or something like that, then you'll be able to see and maybe recognize those same patterns, but also have the ability to be able to address and start to resolve some of those issues. So that's all I've got here. I did see a note in the comments. I can definitely share this after the fact. I'll send out a link and probably just commit and save all of these into GitHub and just share these out as well.
Awesome. That was great. Saying it wasn't comprehensive and then going through all those tools like that was just that was incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I mean, you went into basically vulnerability databases, the CNCF, all the incubation and graduated tools. You got into SIEM, right tools. What did I miss? Kubernetes open source tools. Like there's so much there. So we're gonna make sure that we clip it after. If you're watching on Twitch and you want to check it again without watching the whole thing, we're gonna clip it and send it out. But yeah, thanks again. And if you don't mind, I'm gonna throw a bunch of questions at you.
Yeah, no problem. And I think like just to your point, it's definitely this long road of just looking at how to scope even the world of these security tools and cloud native security, because there are so many different layers now, and it's not just this straight model where you've got like your 7 layers or your 4 layers and that's it. It's definitely like now this iterative process, like that cloud where you've got all of these different endpoints.
Yeah, you're pretty much answering the first question I was going to have was, with the speed of all these apps that are coming out, and especially just the pluggable nature of things like Kubernetes, what are the challenges to tool adoption? And then the other thing I was going to extend that is, how do you get over fatigue, like update fatigue, tool fatigue? Even if you are using these small tools, what if the developers kind of leave and don't support it, right? So like, how do you sort of navigate that space and figure out what tools for you?
Ooh, that is a really tough question, especially coming from, now that I'm on the customer side, I definitely have a different perspective, but I was a practitioner for many years. And there's definitely the problem of, the thing that we're using for security and authentication was built by somebody that left the company and nobody else knows how to really maintain it. It just kind of keeps working. And there is definitely this cycle of one, tool fatigue, but also like the maintainability issue, because I think with the speed of things being updated, you now have this divergence of like, there's a critical dependency where now you are maybe version locked into something else because the tooling that you built was now dependent on this thing. I mean, I think hopefully we're not having the Python 3, Python 2 conversation anymore, but there are places that you just don't have necessarily the velocity or even the resources to be able to go in there and update. And I think part of it too is as it's one, just taking a look within the org at what you have and what you're trying to solve for, because sometimes the latest tool is not necessarily the tool that you need that is going to solve what you have, because as you mentioned, like the pace of things is so quick, where you might have something that like Security Monkey by Netflix is now, I think, officially deprecated, and the sort of guidance that they have on their pages. Well, all right, GCP has a tool, Azure has a tool that you can use for this sort of inventory process to move towards that. And I think understanding that if it's understanding the compelling reasons to have to jump on something that is bleeding edge is really important. If there is a compelling reason to move to something that does cert management in the way that you need it to, because you have nothing that will solve that right now, then that should be a big driving force, but not so much just because this is a new thing, just because this is something that is really beneficial. It's just making really conscious decisions about how to spend that time. But there is also just this fatigue, even going through some of the awesome lists that are out there and looking at the tools listed. It's like, whoa, those are 5 that haven't been updated or maintained. And, even like some 3 or 4 years, but even things that haven't been touched in a year and a half, you kind of wonder about what the update cycle is. And, is it going to work with the latest release candidates? And sort of taking that stability question into consideration when approaching what type of tooling that you're going to be putting into place.
Yeah, it actually, it touches on a lot of what Michael said earlier, especially like knowing exactly everything that you're putting in, but also, trying to avoid dependencies. So if you're using something like a container vulnerability scanner, maybe that part can be ripped and replaced with something that's supported by a cloud provider later on or something like that, right? The more ingrained those things become, and you get this like huge, large tool set, and you don't really understand how they all work, the harder it is to, understand how to navigate it.
Totally. And I think to add to that, which I mentioned a little bit, is this whole idea of buy versus build, where, at some point that trade-off of the human capital versus the making that business case for, is this something that I know I want to plug in because then we can focus on X features, or is this something that's enough of the critical path and requires this specialized internal knowledge of your process, or maybe because everybody's CI process is maybe slightly different. So if there's something that's so unique where the best investment is to say, let's purpose build something for this. And that's where you see big companies like, Lyft and Netflix and so on, building these tools internally that later get open sourced. But Netflix tool is not necessarily going to be, your streaming startups tool, it might not necessarily be like what the finance company needs. So it's also making those decisions about like, all right, do I want to invest in buying something that will solve most of these problems so that my team and intellectual capital can focus on building application features, or is this important enough that it will improve our velocity so that we should build this because now we can move that much faster. So there's that trade-off also.
Yeah, that's great. And Steve actually dropped this in partially, I think, knowing where this is going to go. And he said, how critical is the ease of the security tool adoption, right? Like, and just like you said about, buying versus creating, we have customers all the time that's like, they don't necessarily care that much about security. It's like, we just need compliance, and they come and they're willing to do the things to implement it in an easy way. So what do you see in your day-to-day when people are looking for these solutions? How easy does it need to be? And I think, like you said, you want to solve most of the use cases, but you don't need the perfect tool, right? So it's like, where do you see that balance, and how much does like the ease of adoption matter?
Oh yeah. I think especially as we're moving towards this world where, the teams are working together harmoniously, the less that security as a team and a practice can seem adversarial to everybody else, the less that it can become like this barrier to us moving, like to a team moving quickly, the better. And of course, some of the policy constraints should be in place because you're like, no, there are certain things that we can't release unsecured, like we can't have like open Mongo databases, to use a very simple example, right? We can't have, keys that are published in version control, no matter how quickly it lets you spin up a dev environment. So there's certain things that should always kind of be like your baseline security requirements. But I think the more that you can reduce friction for a development team to be able to do what they need to from a feature point of view, then the more likely that these security practices are going to be adopted. Because in reality, if there is so much friction and overhead for being able to implement security, at the end of it, the dev team or the engineering team or whoever is going to find some workaround, which is now this sort of human layer that gets introduced of saying, like, we're going to do things insecurely because they just didn't have a quicker way of doing a thing. Mm-hmm. So that ease of being able to deploy a solution or even integrate it into your daily workflow, it becomes pretty important.
Yeah, I remember trying to introduce my grandma to like 1Password, and just getting her to keep track of her passwords was a hassle. So I'm all I completely on board with the whole, making things easy for developers. Otherwise, they're gonna move on to their own solution. But yeah, thank you so much for joining. That was awesome, and I hope we get to talk a little bit more after too. If you have some time to stay around and hang out in Toucan, we'd love to chat a little bit more.
Awesome.
Yeah, thank you so much. Unfortunately, I got to kick you out and bring everyone else in.
No problem. It's been great. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Take care. And I'm bringing the crew back.
Hey.
Hey. All right. Episode 3 in the books. Thanks so much to our presenters. That was a great show. Tam, Steve.
I love the Cube Winter shout out. So thanks for the love, Muriel, on that. That was a nice little surprise. But we'll definitely add all the links that Michael Hausenblas shared, all the links from Muriel's talk. Look out for the post-event email, because that's where all the resources are post-event as well.
Yeah, and if we still have time, I want to do something real quick. Let me just share my screen after this is done in 2 seconds. All right, hold on. Share screen. So I have to reset this thing. 1 second. I'm sorry. It's really slow. All right, there you go. Okay, so you guys can all see this. So you got a $50 gift card. Thanks to everybody who was participating in the chat. I threw everybody's Twitch names up there. Gonna raffle it off. Sorry, Steve, you don't get to win. And I'll send you a message on Twitch after. And if not, if the person doesn't respond, we'll just carry the gift card over into next month. But thanks again for chatting. And it looks like, ooh, Brian snuck in at the end too with a great good job to Murriel. So Brian, congrats. I'll ping you after on Twitch through a whisper. And yeah, thanks for joining in the chat, everybody. Honestly, it was great.
That was good. It was interactive. Love it.
Cool. Any other announcements? Any other housekeeping before we take off to Toucan? To
Toucan land.
Yeah, just a reminder, these are our speakers for next episode 4. So this will get posted on the Meetups page, and then we'll see you next month for that. And then should we add the Toucan link?
Yeah, it's in there. Just added it. So if you guys have a chance, come chat, hang out, bring wherever, I don't know what time you're at.
Bring your friends.
Bring a friend. Yeah.
I'm all alone there at the moment. I'm already there.
All right.
With all my friends.
Take care, everyone.
Take care.